hppodcraft.com.
It was somewhere at the back of beyond. Maybury would have found it difficult to be more precise. He was one who, when motoring outside his own territory, preferred to follow a route given by one of the automobile organizations, and on this very occasion, as on other previous ones, he had found reasons to deplore all deviation. This time, it had been the works manager's fault. The man had not only poured ridicule on the official route, but had stood at the yard gate in order to make quite certain that Maybury set off by the shortcut, which according to him, all the fellows in the firm used, and which departed in the exactly opposite direction. The most that could be said was that Maybury was presumably at the outer edge of the immense West Midlands conurbation. The outer edge it by now surely must be, as he seemed to have been driving for hours since he left the works, going round and round in large or small circles, asking the way and being unable to understand the answers, when answers were vouchsafed. All the time, seemingly more off course than ever.
Those were the opening few paragraphs of Robert Aickman's The Hospice, and we're going to give this strange story a strange study.
Because that's what we do here on hppodcraft.com, Strange Studies of Strange Stories. I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And I'm Chris Lackey, and we're also on Patreon. This is a free show, but please consider subscribing for 6 shows a month and access to over 500 episodes in our archive.
Yeah, this is in fact episode 566 of the show right now. 566, the number of the guy one street over from the beast.
It is.
Larry. A significant number in great proximity to evil, and we have a guest here to join us on this special occasion.
We are joined by the writer of such joys as The League of Gentlemen, Funland, Psycho Bitches, and Tracy Ullman Show, Jeremy Dyson. Welcome, Jeremy.
Delighted to be with you guys. Really, it's a pleasure and a treat to get to talk about Aickman.
Jeremy has also written several books, including Bright Darkness, Lost Art of the Supernatural Horror Film, a nonfiction guide to horror films, and 2 collections of short stories entitled Never Trust a Rabbit, as well as the novel What Happens Now. There are some shows that kind of work their way into everyday conversation. The Simpsons, for example, it just becomes part of your speech pattern. League of Gentlemen is one of those shows for my wife and I. You know, when we're on the road, she'll go, oh, look, it's a local shop for local people. No accent, no imitation. That's just how you say that now.
Yeah.
We're huge fans, so I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, that's great to know. Also that it crosses cultural divides as well. You know, we never were sure what Americans would make of it. So it's great to know that it plays to you.
Well, you almost suffered from that. I don't know what it is about human nature, but for a long time, people were saying, have I got the show for you? You are going to love this. And I thought, well, I'll show you. I'll just not watch it. But then when I finally did, I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. And I have to say, while we were reading this Aickman story, I was thinking, there's definitely some influence here.
Oh, well, that's absolutely right. I mean, Aickman was one of the things that me and Mark Gatiss, my fellow League of Gentlemen co-writer, we bonded over Robert Aickman when we first met each other. It's one of the things we bonded over. So you're right to pick up on that resonance.
Our reader this week is none other than Greg Johnson. I'm sure everybody recognized him. He's been bugging me for a while to do some Aickman stuff, but I've dodged Aickman. I don't know why. You know, all the stuff that we cover, Aickman has been on the periphery. And I listened to, Jeremy, you did a BBC mini documentary on Radio 4, right? Was Radio 4?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it was Radio 4.
You talk about how nobody seems to know who this guy is. Why is he on the periphery, do you think?
He's kind of less and less on the periphery, it has to be said. Well, I mean, he's still, I suppose, quite niche, but his reputation has definitely grown almost year on year, I think. But since he died quite in 1981, so 40 years ago. I mean, he was very celebrated in his own time. He was a World Fantasy Award winner more than once, I think. But in terms of mainstream acknowledgement, by say the literary establishment, that never came to him at all. And that's strange to me because he's such a phenomenally brilliant writer. You know, he is up there with M.R. James, we'll take your pick, but I'd say he's up there with Poe, and he's certainly up there with Ray Bradbury as a unique voice in supernatural fiction or strange fiction. Strange stories is how he described his own work.
Which is so killer for us since we just recently rebranded to Strange Studies of Strange Stories. I was like, hey, he gets it. I love it. This is perfect.
I mean, he's so unique. His voice is so unlike anybody else's that may be part of it. Maybe that is enough to just alienate people, or maybe as time passes, he will become more and more known. Only time will tell.
My first acquaintance with Aickman happened a couple of years ago at a bookstore where my wife picked up a copy of Dark Entries randomly because she liked the cover art. We didn't know anything. I thought maybe it was because of the Bauhaus song, but she liked that cover art. Neither of us had read him. This is part of a series that collects Aickman's fiction from Faber and Faber. The story we're reading today is in the collection Cold Hand in Mine, which you're mentioned in the introduction in that collection, actually.
Oh, in this latest reprint, yeah. In
Cold Hand in Mine, yeah.
But I've been sort of associated with Aickman for probably about 20 years and publicly now, because I've sort of, because he was an obsession, I've adapted his work. Mark did a radio adaptation. I've done a short film of one of his stories. Strangely, I did an oratorio, sung like a mini opera, which of one of his stories called The Same Dog, which I wrote the words for, or adapted the words for. So he's been an obsession for as long as I've been a professional writer.
And now, how did you come across him? Was there, when you were a child, did some creepy uncle pass it off to you?
Well, almost exactly that. Aickman in the 70s used to edit the Fontana Book of Ghost Stories, which was a recurring anthology of ghost stories. It came out regularly through the 60s and 70s. So I was very young in the 70s. I was probably about 7 or 8, but I had a reputation for liking spooky stuff even then. There was one year when I got bought loads of stuff for my birthday, and there were 2 Aickman edited collections that I got that year. They were completely unsuitable for a 7-year-old. Because these stories, they're not just terrifying, but they're kind of insidious. They get inside your head. That was where it began. And I don't think, to be honest, I don't think I read too many of his stories then. He always used to put one of his stories in those collections, because they would have just obviously gone over the head of a 7-year-old. He didn't really get me as a fan until I was probably about 20. It was when I started reading him properly. But I knew him as the Ghost Man because of those collections. The seed was planted there, and then it kind of flowered quite a bit later. When there was, as I say, when it was about 19 or 20, when there was a reprint of Cold Hand in Mine. There was a mid-80s reprint of Cold Hand in Mine. And that was what got me. I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. Literally, from the first story, it was almost like something I've been waiting to read. It was everything that I wanted in supernatural fiction.
Well, it certainly feels that way for both of us, because we're new readers to Aickman, and it's a sliding scale between the stories we cover on this show. Sometimes, more often than not, these are straight monster stories, whereas this is more like The Willows, where it's that much more rarefied air of weird fiction, where he really achieves, I think, the things that Lovecraft set out when he described what this is, which is a touch from the outside. I read the story, the School Friend, first, and it scared the hell out of me.
Yeah,
it really did.
It's terrifying, The School Friend. Yeah,
which is it doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't.
So to me, I thought, wow, this is the top shelf stuff we're discovering here.
Yeah, and a lot of his stories will do that. The Stains is one that really upset me and really, genuinely frightened me. And The Swords, lots of them have that effect. Yeah,
I just read that on my way to Scotland. Well, I listened to the audio of it on my way to Scotland. The kids had their headphones in the back, and it's just one of these things where you think it's going someplace and it goes this other place. And there's always, with his writing, I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, it could always be something else. Like, I always feel like maybe it's supernatural, maybe it's not supernatural, but it's definitely not normal. And it's right. Unsettling in that way that life is often unsettling, where
it's too much like life.
It's a little too much like life, but in a great way. I don't understand how this guy has flown under the radar, especially for me and the stuff that we've covered. I should have listened to Greg.
You're a fool.
I'm just busy. Guys got stuff to do.
One takeaway is that you're a fool.
But it happens. Listen, I've literally only in the last year read Arthur Machen, which is to me unbelievable, because Macon is such a huge figure in supernatural fiction, and it's just taken me that long to get round to him for some reason, and was blown away by Macon, who actually is a touchstone for Aickman, I think, as well, in terms of the strangeness and the weirdness and that sense of having stepped out of the ordinary world. It happens because we are finite creatures.
We are.
Well, but it's always such good news. I mean, this was great news because I have all these books to read now.
Yeah.
Well, how about a little bit of bio, Chris?
Sure. Aickman, he was born in London. Robert Aickman was born in London in 1914, the son of an architect, and he was the grandson of the Victorian novelist Richard Marsh, known for his occult thriller The Beetle, which was very popular at the time.
It outsold Dracula, I read, at the time in 1897. We might get into it at some point because it has something to do with an ancient Egyptian entity that manifests through a beetle and has really specifically weird mind powers and stuff. So that's right. That's in our wheelhouse. So we might get around to Grandpa's work as well.
Robert Aickman studied architecture like his old man, and I'm not sure how he made his living at first, which his bio that I can find on it was very vague about how he made money.
Well, it's very mysterious how he made his living. It seems he must have had a small private income, as they used to say, maybe some stipend or some pension or something that he was able to live quite frugally on, because he seemed to sort of please himself. I mean, he did have another professional life, or semi-professional life, as that he founded the Inland Waterways Association, or co-founded it. But in the UK, that was the canals, which had all completely fallen into disrepair. The UK had a big canal network that dated back to pre-railway times, and they were all still there, but they were just completely grown over and clogged with weeds and forgotten. And so this organisation that Aickman started rescued the canals, and most of those canals are open now, or many of them are open because of Aickman. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for him and the other people in that organisation. So that's a major contribution to British culture as well, albeit a non-literary one. So, fascinating man.
We love our canals around here.
Oh, yes. Well, yes.
At Keighley, yeah.
Yeah, you've got the Leeds-Liverpool running by you, haven't you?
We do, yeah. Walk by it often. We walk a dog down there on Saturdays. It's great. I love the canals. Robert was married to author Edith Gregerson in 1941, but then they divorced 16 years later. But he wasn't remarried after that. That was it for his married life.
It was, although he did apparently have a fairly long-standing affair with Elizabeth Jane Howard, who was who's a great English writer, who wrote some fantastic supernatural fiction in their own right. In fact, the first book that Aickman published was co-written with her. They wrote 3 stories each, called We Are for the Dark is the name of the collection. I think their affair started after that. She worked in the Inland Waterways Association. She was the secretary, I think, of the Inland Waterways Association, or was there in some capacity, and I think that's how they met. But she was a big literary figure because she went on to be a renowned novelist. I think she was married to Kingsley Amis. Was it Kingsley Amis? I think she was. Who was a great British novelist.
Oh, love triangle. I smell the romantic comedy.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's a very literary arrangement. A sort of, I don't know, wasn't quite a menage a trois, but I think it was a fairly open secret that she was having an affair with Aickman. So
now he was interested in the supernatural, and he was a member of the Society of Psychical Research and the Ghost Club.
Yeah, that's right. Now, that Society of Psychical Research, which Harry Price, the famous ghost hunter, he was another famous member of that organization.
I've read a little bit about his idea or his beliefs in the supernatural were sort of very open-ended or vague. Like he didn't necessarily literally believe in transparent entities floating around. It was something else.
I think that's right. Yeah. Again, he's not really documented about it, but it was all about the feel for him. He was a very, very sensitive man by all accounts. It was about the atmosphere, the feeling. I mean, he did allude to experiences that he'd had in letters and things, to correspondence, but never went on record as you say, as a sort of card-carrying believer in tangible ghosts and spirits. But it was definitely part of his interest in the esoteric. And that there are more things in heaven and earth.
He died of cancer, or he got cancer in 1979, but he refused medical treatment and opted for homeopathy.
I believe that's right, yeah. And I think he died in the homeopathic hospital. Yeah, so again, another sort of example of his belief in esoteric and non-material. I mean, he was a great skeptic about modernity. In fact, that's another reason why he may come back into fashion now, because this is something that is increasingly in the mainstream. But he was somebody who concluded that mankind took a wrong turn at the Industrial Revolution, as far as he was concerned. I mean, that's something he was on record as saying. That's an undercurrent in all of his fiction, really, is this loathing for sort of secular materialism. So in many ways, he's a kind of religious writer without being in any way denominational. He was not identified as a Christian or following anything, and yet there is a very spiritual quality to his work. That's very much what he's about, on quite a deep level, I think. So yes, the homeopathy sort of fits in with that, I think.
He received the World Fantasy Award in 1975, and we actually have a quote of something that he wrote in response to it. I'll have Greg read this.
I believe in what the Germans term Ehrfurcht, reverence for things one cannot understand. Faust's error was an aspiration to understand and therefore master things which, by God or by nature, are set beyond the human compass. He could only achieve this at the cost of making the achievement pointless. Once again, it is exactly what modern man has done. I believe in life after death, and I decline to particularize upon the meaning of the words. Because of all futile and reductionist attempts at definition, this is the most idle. Most of my stories aim at universal themes, however difficult it may be to attain them.
So this is somebody who's just saying, I don't understand it all, and I think it's arrogant to say that you understand it all, which is something that I'm perfectly in alignment with. I think that's a great attitude to have.
The thing is, you can't argue with that, because that's the truth. I mean, another writer I think he's got a lot in common with is Kafka. And Kafka had this great phrase, which was, the thing about being human is that you keep coming up against the bony limits of your own forehead. That's exactly Aickman's position as well. There's limits to what we can know. Most of it is mystery. And the sort of pretense of modernity is that actually we know everything. And anything we don't know, we will know. It's only a matter of time. But it's a nonsensical position, because
absolutely,
obviously we're bounded by our biology. And the idea that we can comprehend all of reality, it just seems insane that anyone would even posit that.
Yeah.
And yet that's the modern position, because we're so in love with our technology and our science.
That's the arrogance. Boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different show, maybe, because I'm like, let's talk about that for a while. But we should dig into this story.
Yeah.
Yes. The Hospice was originally part of his collection, Cold Hand in Mind, 8 Strange Stories, released in 1975. Jeremy, you chose this one for us to cover as the first one. Why this story?
Well, I think I chose it because it's the one that hit me first. I think it's in the edition of Cold Hand Man that I've got, I think it's probably the second story, maybe the third. And the minute I read it, it was like a complete mind blown. It was like nothing I'd ever read before. The impact it had on me was extraordinary. It's a supernatural story, but there's nothing supernatural in it, or there's perhaps one possible supernatural event, but there's no ghosts, there's no monsters, there's no vampires. It wasn't like anything else, and it was hard to understand at the time I read it when I was 20 how it was doing what it was doing to me. And I've since, over the years, got a bit more of a handle on that. But yeah, it was just it was a big light bulb, a massive epiphany for me.
Well, it's also funny. It's a funny story, surprisingly, and it carries the humor across in a way where I'm not sure what the joke is. It's an absurd situation that I'm laughing at, but I feel menaced and uncomfortable at the same time. And that's when I was saying, this is clearly informative of League of Gentlemen. This is definitely imprinted on that in some way, because I had those sensations watching that show as well.
There's a lot of comedy of manners in Aickman, and you get a lot of that in this story. He was an acute observer of sort of English politeness and the hypocrisy that went along with that, or how politeness and manners are used to cover up terrible behavior. His characters are beautiful, and particularly when he's in this very dryly comic mode, as he is here. The Hospice is a hotel, is a sort of hotel of sorts, and he gets how the staff speak, and that sort of brilliantly English thing of how staff in a hotel can have absolute disdain for you, even as they're speaking politely. The Fawlty Towers thing. That's very peculiar to the English, who have no concept of service at all. There is no such thing as English service. And so there's a lot of that going on at the start of the story, which draws you in because you recognize it. It feels true.
Well, that opening, I think, for me, is its own little horror story. Simply that the man insists he takes the other way that he doesn't want to take, and then he has to because he's watching him. That just filled me with so much anxiety right away. I hate it when somebody asks me to do something and then watches me while I do it. What if I don't want to do this, And he has to stand. Well, that guy stands there. He drives off in the opposite direction of where he wants to go. You could have stopped there. That's scary to me.
And it's a little foreshadowing for everything that's going to come as well. And plus, of course, we're introduced to Maybury as a man who's literally lost. And as the story unfolds, we discover that he's figuratively lost as well. He's somebody who's lost in his life, or lost his way in his life. So it's a great opening on many levels, because it's doing about 3 or 4 things at once.
He's low on petrol, pulls over, finds himself in some kind of suburb. There are houses, but they're set way back from the main road.
It's so relatable. It's exactly where you find yourself when you have to go to the bathroom so badly on a road trip, and suddenly there's no businesses, it's just houses, and they look non-hospitable. He's got a wife, Angela, and a son at home. He doesn't want to run out of gas in the middle of nowhere if he just keeps driving. So he, for a moment, is going to look for help on foot. I thought it was interesting that he stopped at a place he describes as a bifurcation in the road. So it's essentially a crossroads, right?
Yeah, you could go either way once again.
Now, as he heads off down one of the roads on a little sidewalk, he's attacked by something. And this was the first instance of something that also happened in The School Friend, where I was very lulled into the pace of the text, and then something happened very abruptly. And I feel like the description in the text probably took about the same amount of time to read as the incident. It's just sudden and disorienting. It says his wife and son were awaiting him. He must resume the fight to rejoin them, and then suddenly, something shot out at him from the boskage on his left. He had disturbed a cat, returned to its feral habitude. The first he knew of it was its claws, or conceivably its teeth, sunk into his left leg. There had been no question of ingratiation or cuddling up. Maybury kicked out furiously. The strange sequel was total silence.
So the thing is, you don't know quite what's bitten him, and that almost to me like a quotation from Casting the Runes, the M.R. James story, where the protagonist puts his hand under the pillow and something bites him. It's definitely an omen. It's not quite a cat.
Yeah, infuriatingly vague. Maybe he saw the eyes. There was no mew or scream, so it was a silent attack too. And then the injury hurt so much he doesn't want to look at it or touch it. So I found this to be something that he does, is he distances us. Sometimes we get unreliable narrators, or we get narrators that are really doing that on purpose. They're dropping information, but he packs in real human ways to do it. I don't even want to look at that. And then I'm sitting here with the book going, look at it. I want to know what happened. What happened to your leg? You jerk. But this definitely could have been some kind of guardian at the gate if this is zooming off into another plane of reality or something. I was very interested at this point. But the injury is such that he stops walking, he heads back to his car, and he gets in to continue driving.
But he comes across this sign for a hotel called the Hospice. It's arranged in a strange way on the page as well. It says the Hospice, good fare, and then accommodate.
Some accommodation. And I have to say that detail, that was I think the thing that really got me in terms of making me fall in love with Aickman. It's so unusual. It's such an odd detail to do that sort of typographical game. It's like a poet might do.
It made me think of E.E. Cummings or something.
Yeah, or something from Tristram Shandy. There's something meta about it. But he's not that kind of writer. The last thing he is a postmodern writer. And yet it's playful. It's so it's almost like something from a Monty Python book or something. It's so unexpected that it's completely charming as well as being very strange. And it's so strange that it's almost permanently lodged in my psyche, that good food, some accommodation sign. I just think of it all the time.
It knocks you into the modern world a bit as well, because we're so used to reading things that were initially printed in pulps. People weren't experimenting with the actual typographic layout as part of the story. When I came across that, I was like, oh yeah, this wasn't written in the 30s. This is from, well, I don't know when he wrote it, but this was published in the 70s.
Early 70s.
Like the 60s.
It was early 70s, yeah.
So it suddenly brought me into, this is somebody who is going to be writing around the same time as these postmodern authors and people who were playing with what does it look like? What do the margins look like? Well, how do we actually put this on the page? And that was really invigorating as well.
Yeah, and it's about the only time he does it in any of his stories as well. So it's it's just a gorgeous detail and perfectly judged because it just fits tonally. It's as a piece of taste. literary taste on his part.
And
it's
it heightens the horror a little bit too, because when you see the broken sign or you see the poorly laid out sign, you think, well, what else is wrong with this place?
Well, and also as someone who grew up and at least started life in Britain at that time, I recognize that. I recognize the kind of place that he's alluding to, these kind of half-timbered restaurants that would be in suburban areas that would be sort of gesturing back to Tudor times. There was a lot of mock Tudor in Britain in the 20th century, and it's got that feel, that sign. I could picture that sort of place. There's a place in Ilkley called the Box Tree, which is a very fancy restaurant in Ilkley where I live, and they've very much got that aesthetic. It's sort of as if it's something from an old castle or tavern.
Right.
A hospice is a place where people who are terminally ill go to spend their last days in a modern sense, but it does have an alternative meaning.
Yes, it goes back. Hospice actually refers to the hospice movement itself is relatively recent. So only a little bit earlier than this story was written, the hospice movement was started, probably in the mid-60s, I think. But yes, the hospices before that were hospitals. They were Catholic hospitals in medieval times, but they also took in pilgrims as well. You either went there if you were sick or if you were a pilgrim. You didn't go there if you were a casual visitor.
Certainly, it seems an odd choice of hotel name, but yes, this is in the 70s is when the hospice movement was coming up.
Yeah, and there's no way it can't have that meaning. It's redolent of terminal illness. It's something, and so that's immediately terribly unsettling because, certainly, I was aware of what hospices were when I was a kid, and and the idea there was one near us, near our house when I was growing up. You would drive past it every day on the way to school, and it used to frighten me because I had no idea what went on in there. And so he's absolutely he's playing on all those associations.
From a story standpoint, too, he's going into a place where people die, and as a guy who reads these types of stories, I'm thinking, oh, this is not going to be good for him.
No, it's bad foreshadowing.
And also the strangeness within the story of what kind of, because the place is very much a hotel. It says good food, some accommodation. What kind of hotel would call itself a hospice?
Exactly.
I don't know.
The question that's begged by that is enormous and funny.
And this thing is old, right? Because when he pulls his car up there, he sees that there's another path this is a recently carved in entrance, and there's another much older path that stretches off toward the woods or the bushes, right?
And yet it's got the gate that's like from a farmyard, a modern farmyard. He says it's like the gate to a big bullpen or something. Again, just everything's wrong. It's not the sort of gate that you would have on a hotel or a restaurant. And a big security light comes on as well, a very bright light. So every expectation that you've got is kind of immediately inverted, all in the space of a paragraph.
Instead of a creepy butler answering the door, it's a handsome young man.
Yeah.
Curly fair hair, untroubled face, white jacket, very cherubic, very angelic, and doesn't seem troubled that the protagonist is here. He's troubled because it seems dinner's already started, but he just assumes this guy is late to it.
Mayberry he's taken to the dining room. There's a long table down the center. Everyone is quietly eating. Nobody's talking. And it's mixed ages. Mayberry, he sat at a side table, not at this big main table. He notices there is an attractive middle-aged woman sitting at another one of these side tables.
He can't really make out details of anybody. It's very hot and stuffy, and people are mostly very quiet, which is odd. And again, a lot of the horror in the story are these mundane discomforts. Not getting information on what is going on is so anxiety-inducing. Those were the things that were gripping me. Can you just tell me what the program is here? And how much am I going to be charged for all this? There was some economic anxiety later as well. This food's really good.
It's the physical details, too, because it's uncomfortably hot, so immediately you're kind of reading that, and by now if you're reading it you are Mayberry, so you're imagining yourself in that position, so there's the physical discomfort of the heat, but then the really chilling stuff starts when he's served the food, which is good, but there's too much of it and it's thick. So he's served this thick soup first of all on an enormous plate, and he has to eat all of it. And someone stands over him like a nanny,
Stands over him like the guy that watched him drive away. Yeah. All of that it's somebody over your shoulder watching what you do. It's so uncomfortable. And I also thought in that moment, because he says the soup is a lot, but then the bowl, the receptacle itself is deeper and wider than he thought. And it's inscribed with these letters, the hospice, he says, rather in the style of a baby's plate. And I thought as he was describing it, wait a minute, is this a large volume of soup or is he getting smaller? You know, is he somehow devolving into a more childlike state? And I noticed there was a lot of language about being a child, being a baby. Mm-hmm. He's being treated in a childlike manner. Everything is sort of babyish and small. So, what's going on here?
Is it for his own good?
Mm-hmm.
And then when the next course is brought out, and it's, again, the description's so vivid, and it's a huge slab of oily turkey and you know, too many potatoes. It always makes me think of years ago, we went to, it was Christmas. Some friends had invited us for tea and cake in the afternoon. So we had Sunday lunch, and then we went to, arrived at our friend's house. This was me and my wife. Actually, they'd made us lunch. It wasn't tea and cake. They'd cooked us lunch, and we were too embarrassed to say that we'd already had quite a big lunch, and they'd made this huge Christmas lunch, and it was exactly like, it was the most awful thing, having to try and force food in when you're not hungry.
You're not hungry, and it's hot too, and eating when it's hot.
That's an illness thing as well, you know, a loss of appetite, and having to eat when you're ill. It's that seems to be part of the mix as well. So all of this is just adding up. The little odd details are getting just this gradual escalation of discomfort.
Right, and then my favorite line in the story, which is funny, is when he's, I can't get through this plate of pasta if you want me to eat that next course, which she had told him was turkey, as if he was a little boy and it was his favorite meal. And then the woman says, it's turkey tonight. You know how turkey just slips down you? It's so disgusting that she says... It's a very viscous food. It won't be a problem for you to eat it at all.
And then you get the breaking of all social convention, where this is the waitress who's serving it to him, then loses her temper and knocks the food to the floor. Again, which is part funny, but also part terrifying, because that breaking of social conventions is often a very scary thing. It's very unsettling.
Hi, folks. Don't want to further unsettle you, but we're going to have to break not just social conventions, but this episode in half. We're going to be back next week with the second and concluding part of our conversation with Mr. Dyson on this story, The Hospice. Again, this was our free show for October. The next will be available exclusively for Patreon subscribers. Check us out at patreon.com/witchhousemedia. Also wanted to note that we're going to be doing some website updates this month, and we'll be letting you know about those changes as we go via social media. Won't affect Patreon subscribers at all, however. And our feature-length adaptation of Clark Ashton Smith's The Colossus of Eloran, which we've been eking out in chapters for bonus subscribers, will premiere in full later this month for free for everybody. Keep your ears peeled for that. We're excited. Thanks, everybody. Hope this episode slipped right through you. And we'll be back next week for more strange studies of strange stories.